All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Welcome everyone to today's breakout on lessons learned from the pandemic around this small business and entrepreneurship. We're so pleased you could join us today. We've got a ton of great discussion leaders, so I want to keep it pretty brief. But before we get started, I wanted to quickly review how the discussion is going to work on the topic that may be new to many of you. We have a max capacity on camera of 9. So if you want to contribute to the discussion at any time, you can request to join audio and video, but we may hit our cap. So if we end up with 9 people, I might remove someone in order to make space for someone else to be able to participate. And then when you're not speaking, but you are on camera, just probably keep it on mute since there's so many of us that will be on camera so that we don't get a lot of feedback. Not on camera, I encourage you guys to engage in the chat box. That way you can leave comments and questions for the speakers, or you can just chat with each other about what we're about. You can type anything in the session chat, and that'll keep that chat to just the room that we're in right now with these people. You can also type @ plus someone's name if you want to direct a question or a comment to a specific speaker or to a specific participant, but still have it in the public chat. If you want to direct message somebody, you'll go to the People tab and type a message to them directly. So with that, let me briefly introduce our discussion leaders. We have a couple that we're still waiting on, but we already have Jeremy Hartman, who is the Vice President of Venture Forward at GoDaddy. We have Jessica Milano with the Southern Opportunity and Resilience Fund. We have Xiomara Peña of Engagement and Small Business Majority. We're super pleased to have 2 NewDEAL leaders with us as co-leaders, Boise Mayor Lauren McLean and Alabama State Representative Jeremy Gray. And then joining us later will be Philip Gaskin, the Vice President of Entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation, and Jake Soberal, who is the co-founder and CEO of Bitwise Industries. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys for framing remarks. I'm just going to go with Xiomara because you're next on my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And welcome to everyone. Thank you for participating in this panel and this breakout session. I'm Xiomara Peña. I'm the Vice President of Engagement with Small Business Majority. And Small Business Majority is a national small business advocacy organization. We have, over the last 15 years, worked to empower America's diverse entrepreneurs and build a thriving and equitable economy. We've done this work since 2005, and we really are focused on addressing the unique needs of small business owners, their employees, and self-employed entrepreneurs, particularly those based in underserved communities. We engage our network of about 85,000 business owners and more than 1,000 business partner organizations, including community-based organizations, CDFI partners, other chambers, and a plethora of different institutions to be able to advocate for pragmatic public policy solutions and deliver resources to entrepreneurs. Now, during this last year, which comes to no surprise to many of you, we have also been advocating for policy and hosting research on how small business owners have been affected by the pandemic. In addition to that, we helped inform small business owners in our network and entrepreneurs with resources and tools that provided a critical lifeline for them to be able to access the federal programs, the state programs, and sometimes local programs that were established to support business owners. We consistently called on federal and state lawmakers to keep the needs of small business owners front and center, especially because we recognize the power that small business ownership has, not just in rebuilding our local economy, but doing so in a way that does so with equity in mind. Now, one of the things that I want to mention is some of the data that we've collected demonstrates that while the pandemic has impacted all businesses, it has not impacted them equally, and we know this. Nearly 400,000 businesses have permanently closed as a result of the pandemic. And when we look at the rates of closure rates for businesses owned by people of color or women, they are absolutely stark. We know that business owners continue to experience significant setbacks, in particular business owners of color who, again, while we've seen some federal relief programs, nearly $1 trillion of relief, there still seems to be a need for direct relief for those business owners, including some of the gaps that were a direct result of how the programs were established. And the Paycheck Protection Program is a great example of this. It was one of those programs that was developed to meet the need of the moment. However, it did rely on our existing system of financial institutions, a system which traditionally excluded disproportionate number of people of color and women who are unbanked or underbanked. And so we've been very proud of some of the changes that the SBA has made to the program. However, we know there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in order to build a program that is equitable. The last thing I'll just mention before I turn it over to our fellow panelists is, in addition to being the backbone of our economy and a proven pathway to economic mobility, small businesses are our largest economic drivers and major job creators, accounting for most new jobs in the US, and they need robust policies and revitalization. The COVID pandemic has helped clear away the fog and laid bare the systemic barriers that have existed for a long time that created those gaps in economic justice, in health justice, and in social justice. And this trifecta creates an opportunity to address, especially as we consider building back a better economy centered on equity. And so I'm looking forward to expanding on some of the research that we've hosted, as well as some of our policy recommendations in this discussion.
Jessica, I think you're next on my screen, so we'll go with you.
That's perfect. It's a perfect transition as well. Thank you, Kelly and Zio. So I'm Jessica Milano, and I am working with the SOAR Fund, the Southern Opportunity and Resilience Fund, and Small Business Majority is a partner in that effort as well, and we're very, very proud to have them on board. So the SOAR Fund really, I think, comes out of some of the challenges with Zio identified. In the last year, we've really seen through the data and our research that the pandemic has had very uneven impact on small businesses, particularly minority businesses and women-owned businesses that were underbanked prior to the pandemic. And the federal relief programs like PPP, which helped many, many businesses, actually didn't serve these businesses very well, because if you were underbanked prior to the pandemic and you didn't have those strong banking connections or relationships, some of those businesses have really struggled to get the capital that they need and have been disparately impacted by the hardships in the last year. So the SOAR Fund came about. It's a set of 13 community lenders across the South and Southeast, very special institutions, community development financial institutions, which are certified by the US Treasury to serve a target market of 60% or greater low to moderate income. So these are mission-driven financial institutions that work in low to moderate income communities and help provide credit and investment in these communities and to entrepreneurs in these communities around the country. So the SOAR Fund is a partnership of 13 CDFIs across 15 southern and southeastern states, with the goal to provide small business working capital loans, flexible, affordable, fixed rate capital to LMI businesses in these communities to help them get the resources that they need to retool, rebuild, and recover from the pandemic. And we're very excited about the opportunity. We're very excited about the opportunity to support both the CDFIs and help more communities access these important resources, and to help the businesses as well. And the South is an area that I think has struggled, particularly lack of support from foundations, from outside investors, from really what's needed to drive investment in these communities to recover. And so we see this as a very important initiative to help bring back and build back better the businesses in this region.
Thanks, Jessica. We'll move to NewDEAL leader, Mayor Lauren McLean from Boise.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to be here, and I really look forward to an in-person conference in November with everyone. I thought I'd just talk a tiny bit on the experience we're having here in Boise and what we're doing next. In fact, just this morning, my economic recovery task force that we convened a year ago In retrospect, it seemed early, but also timed well because it helped us get ready to take the steps we needed to take once we moved beyond COVID or things reopened in bigger ways. They got back together today so that we could talk about the programs that we invested in, the steps that we took based on the recommendations as a city to support the economy, and then pivoted our focus to what's next and how we deploy federal resources that are coming in, but also leverage partnerships we have to meet the needs of the economic environment right now in Boise. And like everywhere, we are experiencing a worker shortage, and our numbers of people that have returned to the workforce are lower than they were pre-COVID. Our unemployment numbers are much lower than they were pre-COVID. It's 3.6% unemployment right now. And our GDP growth estimation is twice what we estimated it to be post-COVID, but we don't have those folks coming back to work. And so what we're finding is that many of the reasons are the structural reasons that existed in it before, but COVID shed light on them. And right now, so many people went home and don't have childcare, don't have access to childcare. The jobs that exist don't pay enough to make it worth finding childcare when it's so limited. So we're beginning to look at how, with a childcare task force, we can meet some of that need by creating partnerships and getting others into the space to help that. But ultimately, if we want to foster entrepreneurship, if we want to continue to support the economy that we have, and we have to get at the root, the foundation, the infrastructure, if you will. And while before COVID, there were many people that felt as though affordable housing and lack of transit was a problem. People were struggling. What COVID did was shed light on that in a much more extreme way, because we are growing so quickly now. People started coming here during the pandemic, and the market is so tight. And so our focus was before, but even more now, has to be on affordability solutions, permanent supportive housing, investments in transportation, and then, yes, seeking ways to increase access to affordable quality childcare so that people can get back to work. And in the first round of funding, as a small city, we didn't really get very many funds. So we took the little bit that we had that didn't reimburse our own lost costs from the state and created small business and grant programs for them. But now we're looking at how we can do more of that. So with the funding we're about to receive as a city, do the Band-Aid fixes of getting money out to the community immediately, fostering entrepreneurship, addressing childcare and housing, but then also attempting with the region, the county that's receiving money, the state, and other leaders in this area to address long-term structural needs if we're going to strengthen the economy and create an atmosphere where people can create jobs or find jobs to build a life that they all want to have.
Thank you, Mayor McLean. Let's move to Jeremy from GoDaddy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. GoDaddy serves 20 million micro businesses in the US. Those micro businesses have been built by 10 million, we call them everyday entrepreneurs. These are not the entrepreneurs you're going to see on the covers of magazines, but they are the self-described homemakers who are selling candles out of their homes. They are the people who are renting excess capacity from their vehicles. They're the people who are starting the smallest of small businesses. And 3 years ago, we started to try and understand the economic impact of these 20 million micro businesses across the US. And it took us a while to figure out. And one of the chief problems we had is no one had ever been able to see these 20 million micro businesses before. Oftentimes, as a country, we look at small businesses, which actually has a huge definition attached to it, which is 250 or 500 and below. These 20 million micro businesses, half of them are solopreneurs, and 90% of them have 10 or fewer employees. So this is a distinct and separate data set from small businesses. And we had a hunch, one, that they had a huge economic impact, and they do when it comes to median income, when it comes to resiliency in the face of economic downturns, and when it comes to unemployment. The data bears out that indeed they're having an impact distinct from small businesses and large businesses and medium-sized businesses. But also we want to understand how they needed to be supported differently than small businesses. GoDaddy's not in the business of developing all the programs that these micro businesses need to be successful. So we've been partnering with cities across the country, including Mayor McLean. We're working with Boise right now, some of the folks in your staff. working with Montgomery, Alabama, Chicago, LA, a host of cities around the country to try and give them this data to better understand the micro businesses in their region. And it's been a really great exercise because as we work with cities, we're learning that these micro businesses are sort of an additional economic lever to all the other ones that they can be pulling. And how you support them looks very different than how you support small businesses. For example, how you support a micro business financially is so different than a small business. The amount of money they need to get started is in the 5 to 10% or less of what a small business needs. And frankly, capital institutions are not set up from an infrastructure or business model point of view to support that kind of capital requirement on the behalf of a micro business. When you take a look at skills training, these are not everyday entrepreneurs who need a 2-year or 4-year degree. They need rudimentary social media training, rudimentary business plan training. And while we have a lot of expertise as a company about how to get people up online, how you reach those folks in cities across the country looks different depending on the city you go to. And the last point I'll make as we think about how to support these micro and small businesses coming out of COVID is that one of our top learnings over the last year or two is that broadband alone, for all of us thinking that broadband is a panacea, is not the panacea. Broadband is table stakes, but you have to wrap some sort of skills training, some sort of economic viability around people around broadband to get that flywheel of economic output happening. So just dumping broadband into an area is not going to create the kind of recovery or the kind of economic benefit that you think it is until there is skills training around it and until people know how to access it in a way that can benefit them economically. So I'm thrilled to hear what everybody else here has to say, and I'm thrilled to be working with many of your organizations and cities, and thank you.
Jeremy, let's move to our other Jeremy, NewDEAL leader, Representative Jeremy Gray from Alabama.
Thank you for having me today. A lot of things that, the panelists said is kind of the things that we're dealing with in Alabama. Access to PPP for minority businesses, especially when you talk about salon, hairdressers, and barbers. They really couldn't take advantage of the PPP and a lot of the SBA loans. One thing that COVID kind of shed a light on was that we didn't expand Medicaid, right? So that was a big thing when we talk about vaccinations, when we talk about testing. A lot of our rural hospitals are closed in Alabama. So when we talk about vaccination stations and testing sites, we couldn't really get a proper count of who needed COVID shots or who had actually contracted the disease or things of that nature. And so that was a thing as well. And then as we know, when it comes to business loans, when you talk about minorities and women, a lot of times they don't get as much when it comes to loans, right? They only get at least about half. And when we talk about affordable housing and minimum wage, and so 99% of Alabama is small businesses. And then through the pandemic, that cut tremendously. So we kind of did a few things as a state. As far as legislation, we passed HB 170 that kind of brought a tax exemption. And on some levels, depending on what kind of business you were, you got a federal tax credit as well. We brought about HB 473 that was around rural and agribusiness and opportunity zoning that actually gave incentives for people to actually bring businesses in rural areas. We have SB 215 that created an authority board for digital expansion. And so one thing that we see with connectivity in rural areas, I may have a part of my district where, it's very connected. And then 5 miles down the road, then, there's no internet, there's no fiber. And so this authority board really incentivizes in a tier where you can look at the underserved in rural areas. And so a lot of times when we talk about these incentives, they usually go to those that, are the most populated or have the most money, right? And so hopefully this piece of legislation with this authority board will incentivize connectivity. We were able to bring this bill forward through the American Rescue Plan, so that universal broadband. And then we also had HB 192 that really extended the Alabama Job Act and reinstated the growing Alabama tax credit. And through that tax credit, we were able to lure in Techstars. And Techstars is an international company based in Colorado, and it provides business accelerators and mentorship programs. And so they were able to locate to Birmingham, Alabama. Through this bill, it incentivized them because they were going other places like Nashville, and through HB 192, we were able to bring them in. And they had a 3-month program where they had 200 applications, and they picked like 10 businesses all across the nation, and they were able to generate $15 million towards them raising money. So this is a great partnership. Along with this partnership, the governor created an innovation commission that I'm a part of. And with this innovation commission, we brought out 2 pieces of legislation, HB 540 that created a public-private partnership, basically a standalone corporation called Innovation Alabama. And then HB 609 that I kind of introduced that bill and got that passed out of the House and Senate. And there was a matching fund for SBIR, and that's Small Business Research Innovation, Innovation Research. And then STTR, that's Small Technology Transfer Research. And it created a matching fund on the state level where you can get those funds on the federal level, but in Alabama, we didn't have that on the federal level. So that makes us very competitive in the state. In Alabama, we're known for aerospace, our port. We have places like Mercedes, Toyota, Hudson Alpha. And so we have great economic drivers to actually, really build Alabama. We're trying to really rebrand our image. And one thing we did do, we brought about XB 46 was medical marijuana. And so if you know that Alabama is big in agriculture, and so I think this is an economic driver as well. So all in all, we've seen the challenges of COVID and what it has brought, but we also have brought good bipartisan legislation, even in a very conservative red state, that we all know that will help Alabama move forward and for a brighter future.
Of Gray, Comptroller Xiomara, I'm going to jump over you and let Jake finish up with the framing remarks, and then maybe you can kick it off with our first question next. But let's go to Jake from Bitwise next.
Hi there, Jake Soberal, CEO and co-founder of Bitwise Industries. Really delighted to join this morning. At Bitwise, what we do is we help cities rebuild digital infrastructure and produce a representative tech workforce. We do this in 3 ways. The first is that we train folks who come from stories of systemic poverty using paid apprenticeship to access opportunity in the technology industry. The second is that we hire many of those folks to build tech solutions, mostly for government. And the third is that we center this work in what we call underdog in 5 cities around the country, actively expanding. By centering the work in those cities, those folks can take these high growth, high wage jobs in the places that they call home. During the pandemic, what we saw is much of the digital infrastructure that we needed wasn't ready for a modern scale, or certainly a crisis. The apps and websites that we depend on for critical social services. One of the things that we were able to do was partner with 15 states and cities in them to build solutions, a platform that matches individuals to the social services that they needed in these difficult times. We see the present needs around rebuilding the nation's digital infrastructure as an opportunity to raise up a representative tech workforce in places that are not known for a tech economy. I think to Jeremy's point, we spend quite a lot of time talking about broadband and too little time talking about how we can create stakeholders in the digital economy at the places that we are connecting to broadband. So really delighted to join the panel today and excited for questions and opportunity to enter into the dialogue.
Thank you so much, everyone. And so we do have one more co-leader who may jump on. He's having trouble connecting. But while we wait for him, so just a reminder to participate on audio and video to ask a question or make a comment. You can click ask to share video and audio. But since we have Nassau County Comptroller Jack Schneerman here, maybe we'll go ahead and flip to Jack. You are muted. Might bring up somebody else in the queue while we figure out his feed. I'm going to add somebody. Hi, Eric.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks so much for allowing me to pose a question. I was just wondering, I work for Via Transportation. It's an on-demand public mobility company. And I was wondering, whoever wants to tackle the question, how big of an issue mobility has been in getting small businesses back and started, especially from the standpoint of both getting employees to newer small businesses starting and or getting customers to places to spur that economic development.
Take that one.
Eric, I'm going to answer it from actually the opposite direction, which is we've seen small businesses take a huge hit during COVID. We've seen an explosion of online micro businesses take off. And these are businesses that are largely run out of the home or a very small brick and mortar store elsewhere. And one of the reasons that we're seeing them be so successful is because they have a customer base that exists all over the country, and also, frankly, a mentor base that exists all over the country or the state, and they're not limited to that sort of small geographic footprint. So when it comes to mobility, as we sort of enter the age of businesses accelerating their stance to get online, we see mobility being less of a barrier. Not to say that we should lessen at all our emphasis on trying to address it where it's needed, but mobility is becoming a little bit less of a barrier now that we have the skills training, we have the online capacity, and we have customers around the country who are much more used to buying and shopping online than they were before. A large portion of the 20 million micro businesses that we start, these are not people who are technology early adopters. We get calls all the time of people wondering how that domain name at the top of their screen mirrors what's actually happening on their screen. So these are people who are just beginning to learn how to set up shop online, where mobility is far less an issue than it is elsewhere.
I'll jump in. I would say that here in our city and our region, mobility is an issue, and not that, you know, a mobility app or an Uber would solve the problem, but that we need a comprehensive transportation strategy and but really a funding source to implement it, of which some of the mobility companies are a solution. And so in our region, people think of us as a much smaller city than we might be. The city itself is 230,000 people. The region itself is 650,000 people. And so there are all these cities within it that have grown together. So the jobs, you know, could be out in Caldwell, and there are Boiseans that want to get there. Many people coming into the city of Boise is the economic engine. But what we see from an employer perspective is there's a ready workforce, but the workforce can't get to where the manufacturing is, where the Amazon plant is, where the meatpacking plant might be. And then from a worker perspective, they too are stuck, you know, and so we are trying as a city to ensure that you can get from home to work, and also not just be stuck in that one job that you figured out how to get to, but to have a world of opportunity open, because there's a transportation system that supports your movement. And it's been difficult to do that in our region because of we don't have local option taxing, so there's not a fund that funds transportation. We as a city have committed to funding as much 5% of our general fund to the Valley Regional Transit System, the bus system, and we're the largest funder of the bus system in the region, but recognize that there's so much more we need to do to extend hours, make it happen more often, partner with mobility companies as that final mile to ensure that employers can get access to the folks that are here, and the folks that are here that are looking can get access to what's available.
Eric, I'm going to move you back off to open the queue back.
Thanks very much.
All right, so a question from Nassau County Comptroller Jack Schneerman. His office is readying a report on smartest ways to spend rescue plan dollars. Curious to see what folks are seeing or would like to see for economic stimulus focused on small business. Anybody have any insights there to share?
Good. I can start. So one of the things that we've seen is a lot of cities and states leverage their stimulus dollars to create direct grant relief-based programs. Now, the way by which states and cities have decided to create and structure their grants programs for small businesses has been different depending on where you are. What we have seen work very well, I'll take California, for example. They had a grant-based program there. Initially, it was only $500 million. Over some time, they had about $2.1 billion in grant funds. One of the things that they did as well was carve out some dollars for navigator support. And so what this did was many business owners oftentimes, again, rely on trusted brokers to be able to distribute information similar to what the SBA is investing in through their navigator program. This investment, this additional layer beyond just distributing the grant capital is meaningful because oftentimes when we're talking about those business owners that experience language barriers or tech barriers, they may have one point of access with a trusted broker that may not be your traditional small business development center, but may also be able to provide that benefit of being able to have already some established trust with communities, hard to reach communities. And so beyond serving a pot of money for direct grant assistance and relief for small businesses, I think that one of the benefits of having this carve out for navigator support provides that opportunity for those disconnected business owners who are not as connected to their ecosystem to also gain access to those programs, because I think that that's one of the things that we've heard substantially. We've also seen some folks use some of their rescue plan dollars in terms of providing and establishing additional direct relief programs beyond just grant-based capital. And I think that that kind of support is meaningful because while tax credits can be beneficial, what we're seeing is many business owners are looking for relief now. They are rehabilitating the losses that they experienced over the last year. And so I know that tax credits can be extremely beneficial in many other instances. However, in this current moment, we're seeing that that is a tremendous need. And this issue of workforce shortages has continued to come up, and I believe will continue to come up. So if there's investments to be made there, to definitely see that boost the county and connect workers to employment opportunities. Yeah,
and I'm happy to jump on that one. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeremy. Apologies. Okay, we'll take turns. So I'm happy to jump on that one as well, Jack. It's a great question. And I think it's also, we're in a particular moment right now where we're sort of pivoting from where we've been in the last year and a half. You know, last spring, last summer, where we were was very different. The economy ground to a halt. There was a great need for sort of direct support and direct grant programs to sort of keep us kind of moving along, right? And as we're pivoting out of this now, we're at a point where I think there's a pivotal opportunity to use sort of federal dollars or public dollars and leverage that with greater private support to sort of promote transformative change in some of the structural challenges we've had. So for example, you know, there's a long-term structural credit gap dating back to the financial crisis for small dollar credit for sort of micro businesses that Jeremy talked about, or for very small businesses. And so one of the models that SOAR is based on, SOAR is actually one of 3 funds across the country. We call these recovery fund models. The first was in New York, the New York Forward Loan Fund, and then the second was in California, and then we've most recently launched SOAR. And the model brings together public subsidy or state support and a first loss reserve and private capital to create that leverage that I'm talking about, so that you can do far greater lending at scale to small businesses through these community finance organizations. And I think as we move through where we are at this point in time, and we look out over the next couple of years about how can we leverage this opportunity, to sort of address some of the long-term structural challenges that we have around equal access to entrepreneurship, or around work. Some of you guys have spoken about a variety of issues, from transportation to workforce development. It's all sort of the same. How can we leverage the spending right now and attract private capital and sort of get greater reach from it? And so there's another program coming down the pike out of the Treasury that some of you on the phone may be interested in, called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. I worked on the first round of this in the Obama administration. And this is a transformative program that provides federal support to states to develop and design their own small business support programs, both lending credits programs or VC investment programs. And this particular iteration of SSBCI, which was passed this year, also includes dollars for technical assistance providers in states around the country to support sort of the small businesses to get credit ready, or to support those ecosystems locally. And it includes set-asides for very small businesses with fewer than 10 employees and for minority-owned businesses. And so I think it has the power to be transformative. And I think identifying some of those models and thinking about how you can, at this point in time, really get more sustainable long-term reach for those dollars is really transformative.
And I would just add that one that we did in Alabama, we actually defined small business, right? And so with our Revive Alabama grant, we hadn't really done anything with our rescue plan money because we still kind of figured that out. But one thing we did with the CARES Act money that came down is that we limited it to, when we first started giving it out, it was like under 20. So it was 20 less employees, right? And so it really stuck to basically a demographic that we felt that needed the money the most. So we got about 250 million for small businesses, and we started off with basically, if you had between 1 and 19 employees, you qualified for it. And as that money was, taken out of that fund, once we got through the first segment, then we would move to like 20 to 40, right, employees. And so we kind of created a dynamic like that because we understood that some of your bigger businesses, they're going to be able to take advantage of PPP and SBA, and they're going to be able to get forgiveness loans and all those things of that nature. But when you're talking about your very, very small businesses, especially like, your sole proprietors or people like that, they don't have no idea when it comes to the financial structure. So I was kind of pretty much pleased with how we kind of gave out our funding on the first round.
I thought I'd jump in here too. We did not get direct to city funding because in CARES, because we weren't big enough the first time around. So we received funding from the state, but most of it was tied up, and there was so little that we got. But of the $9 or $10 million that we received, about $1.5 million of it, even though we had expenses, couldn't be used to cover our stuff. So we propped up a small business investment grant program. And we prioritized at that point businesses in Boise that hadn't been able to receive the funding from the state program that was much bigger. And we did outreach in multiple languages, talked to different community leaders to make sure we could do everything we could to get it out there. The demand was so much bigger than the amount of money that we were able to provide. So in this next round of funding, now that it is direct, as I mentioned before, we want to make sure that we're meeting emergency needs and getting some of those funds deployed into the community as soon as possible, while also being really smart and convening philanthropy and business and the other agencies in this region that are getting funds to see how we can build out more intentional, longer-term strategic investments for the region. But with the funds that we will end up putting into a small business grant program, our plan right now is to take what we learned from the last one and be more specific about where we want to put it and who we want to give it to. So instead of just saying small businesses, we want to say minority-owned businesses. We want to say arts organizations. We want to say, entertainment venues. We don't have the full plan yet, but we realized in the work the last time around that we needed to be more clear about all the different parties that could qualify and could have applied for the limited funds that we had. And so be more specific in our interest in getting it out to different people this next time around, but also look at who was in the queue from the first opportunity that just wasn't able to receive funds because we ran out, and figure out how we merge those so there's some equitable investments throughout the city.
I think along the lines of several threads that have been mentioned here, in Bakersfield, California, a city that we serve, we partnered with the city to convene employers to identify where their talent needs would be, not only today, but looking into the near-term future. And then how can we trace those who are displaced amidst the pandemic to the skills they need to access those opportunities and re-enter the economy in a better place than they left it. And so that is on the workforce training side, a solution that we're really excited about. Another thing that we're really trying to encourage, I think that the knee-jerk reaction with new dollars is to point those dollars at the same partners. But how do we intentionally ensure that those dollars can go to new partners that all too often are minority-led businesses that were the worst sort of affected by the pandemic? And so those are two threads that we're concentrating on with cities around the country.
I'll add to the conversation that you just can't overlook the power of getting small businesses online. When we took a look at the overlapping of these micro businesses and areas where there were small businesses during the worst of COVID, those areas that had offline small businesses but very few online micro businesses tended to do far worse than those areas that had both small businesses and these online micro businesses. And the reason why is the small businesses needed to switch it up if they were losing foot traffic, if they couldn't operate safely within their restaurant or their bookstore. They were able to quickly pivot to an online model, saving oftentimes the lower income employees that they had. Or if the lower income employees were getting laid off because the owner of that small business needed to switch course but could only afford to have him and maybe one or other two people on board, those low income workers were able to go off and start their own micro business. The second point I'll say on this is we worked with a small town, Denison, Texas, just north of Dallas, and using the Venture Forward data, they created a sort of an ROI model on an e-commerce incubator to help get their 200 or 300 small businesses on their main street up online. But when we checked back in with them later and we heard that they had gone through that money really quickly, we're like, that was a huge amount of money. What happened? And they said, well, these small businesses were hiring consultants to make their websites for them to the tune of $6,000 to $12,000 a piece. And that's because these small business folks did not understand exactly how to get set up online. You should be able to get an online presence for a fraction of that. I don't care if you go with GoDaddy or anybody else, but you should be able to get your business up and online for a fraction of that. So this idea of skills training and getting small business people and micro business people up and online, we saw had a huge mitigation effect on the worst economic outcomes of COVID and other economic downturns that we've studied. And the ROI on it is significant.
I just had a thought as you said that, Jeremy, and I think it should be noted because I think that one of the things that we've been talking through is also how procurement opportunity plays a part in also recovery, you know, government purchasing and private purchasing. And part of that ability to be responsive to those opportunities means being online. And so that skills training that is going to need to take place is crucial. And there are many other underpinnings that also connect back to those opportunities, and procurement just stands out. As you said that, I was like, that ties back into how we can also support small businesses growing, and one contract can change the complete trajectory of that business being able to create more jobs and build more opportunity for their local economy. So thank you for prompting that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I just want to add, we actually passed a procurement bill that actually looks at that data. So I'm glad you brought that up. And when it deals with an even playing field for minorities and women owned businesses. So I would bring that to your attention as well.
Thanks, Jack, for that question. I'm seeing a question that it feels like we're going this direction anyway, talking about workforce development. Q&A, I'm seeing a question: what does the future of workforce development programs look like, especially for communities of color? And how can industry and government communicate to address this issue? I know there's dealers who are using this moment of just deep disruption to retool the workforce and help people get in those good jobs. And I'd love to hear more from all of you about that issue.
The things that I think is important to keep in mind is we have an opportunity to define what good jobs look like. And I think many of us might already know that. And there's been a push around creating opportunity that not just provides immediate economic opportunity for the worker, but rather access to a good, high quality paying job. And that means raising the floor for workers. And so it means looking at, minimum wage policies. It means looking at the opportunity to provide healthcare access, to have retirement security access through bills like secure choice bills. As we think about workforce development, I think that those models that provide a holistic approach to supporting workers is critical. And Jake, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot about Bitwise, and I'm really excited about all the work that you guys have done in Fresno, for example. And I think that one of the things that has stood out is your programs also connect those workers back to additional resources. And I think that that's absolutely key, because it's not just about the skills itself. It's also about ensuring that they have the support established to then be able to draw down healthcare resources through a community service organization or another local institution that provides additional support for those workers. And we've seen some really unique models prop up over the last year, in particular, as folks have been leveraging technology and other resources to be able to upskill or reskill as a result of a job loss experience or furlough experienced.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if the aspiration is a diverse and representative tech workforce or workforce in any industry, we think it's really critical that the solution be an ecosystem solution, because as we think about training, the skill is seldom the primary barrier to entry, right? We've got to think about transportation and childcare and healthcare, that the absence of those makes for the absence of space for the learner to acquire skill. And too often, the industries that have the best jobs have deep bias and little economic incentive to actually diversify their hiring practices. So you've got to actually trace intentionally to the employers that are going to hire this diverse and representative talent. And then one of the things we experience in the cities that we serve a banner of cities that we call underdog cities. They wind up being large, economically underperforming cities, is that all too often their very best talent production programs lead to people leaving. So we've trained somebody up in Fresno to go to San Francisco. We've trained somebody up in Toledo to go to Detroit or Columbus. And that's not the aspiration of the city when making these investments. And so how do we think through building out the sort of environments and communities that are going to retain this talent so that they become home buyers and taxpayers and churchgoers in the communities that they call home, such that their economic impact inures to the benefit of needs that growth?
I want to pile on.
I would just say from a lawmaker standpoint, yes. From a lawmaker standpoint of view, being a minority whip, I spend a lot of time really just trying to get minority languages in most of the legislation. And then it's like, what kind of minority? Ethnic minority. So it's all about being intentional, how to place language in there that really helps who you're trying to help, because let's be honest, minority is also a white woman, right? And so when you look at things like that, it can still take away from people of color. So, I just spend a lot of time, and whatever we do, whenever we're looking at a bill, because, most of the bills we pass, they're going to make someone some money, just the bottom line. And so we always want to make sure that we actually get representation for everyone, so it could be inclusive and that everyone can have a seat at the table. And so that's kind of what I kind of do as a lawmaker. And as being a minority whip is just the continuous fight of just trying to get language in the bill.
One of the trends we've seen working with cities across the country, and I had not heard of this term, I think it was when I was actually talking with folks in Montgomery, Alabama, they use the term asset-based community development. And it's a lot of words strung together, but what I took it to mean is that how do we create an economic development cycle for a community where we don't have to bring in alternative assets? That we take the assets that are on the ground in that community and make them work. So that hits right at our heart in terms of what we're trying to do with Venture Forward and the kind of data we're trying to share is when we think about support and we think about funding and we think about investment, is it always about bringing in alternative assets into a community, or can we take what that community already has and turn that into economic development in and of itself?
Thanks for those insights on that really important question. There's another question that came in on Q&A. And again, just to remind everybody, if you'd like to ask a question on camera, please click Ask to share audio and video. But another question we've got here is, what are some prime opportunities for public-private partnerships for small business support? I know Representative Gray already talked about the Innovation Corporation in Alabama, but I'm sure there's myriad examples to be discussed here.
Boy, would I like to understand how a public company can help cities. With the cities that we work with, there are so many for-profit companies knocking on the doors of these cities saying they want to help, and oftentimes the help seems to be one directional back to the company, not to the city at the end of the day. And so as a for-profit company going in to see how we can support cities, getting feedback from the cities on what they need and how we can help is music to my ears. So I'm particularly interested in hearing from Mayor McLean and Representative Gray on this issue in terms of what do you need from companies and what can we do for you that tends to move the needle for the best way.
So happy to pick that up, and I'd like to hear from organizations that have advice on what more we can do to get help from private companies, because we do get that question, and often, as you say, it ends up, we often will struggle with how to put into words what it is that we need, or to understand really how we can work together productively. At least that's what I've noticed in the last 6-9 months. But we've started just looking at our basic needs: housing, transportation, and asking companies that are, particular larger ones that are, looking to be here and are asking how they can help to partner with us to meet affordable housing needs in particular. And we're trying to figure out how to stack land that we have as a city, where we've said, okay, we're going to move all of our tools, all of our trucks, everything out to airport or elsewhere, and clear up land that we have close to the urban core for housing. But we need capital and partnership with those that are seeking people to work for them at the rates they want to pay. And those people need houses that they can afford, or apartments that they can afford. So will you please join us if we put the land out there in creating a capital stack for affordable housing? And so that's been, and I would say, we haven't had a yes yet. We've had a let's work through it. But for our community, housing and transportation, but housing in particular, the biggest struggle right now, being able to find a place to live with the wages that you earn here. And then just quite frankly, inventory. So we've got to create more, and it's got to be at the right price points. And so that benefits businesses, who then will be able to have workers. It benefits the employees because they'll be able to live close to work. And so we're really looking at that right now, just trying to be focused on 1 or 2 asks, and always the same ask, because it's hoping that somewhere we get to that yes piece.
Mm-hmm.
I'll kind of just expound on really the Innovation Commission. One thing that we did do is, because a lot of times we don't know the answers as a state, right? And so we kind of partner with the Hoover Institute in Stanford. This is a group of students, about 12 to 15. They came into Alabama, maybe it was this week, and they're actually going to create a report, right? And so when you're getting a report from people who don't live here, and they're just kind of looking at what needs to be improved, I think that you have a better dynamic than kind of biased opinions of people who live here that may or may not think that things are going on in Alabama. And so the thing that, as far as public-private that we got to look at, especially in places like Alabama, you can't really get the resources you need if you're not passing meaningful legislation, right? You can't get a Tim Cook that went to Auburn University to come back into Alabama when you're doing transgender kids bills or abortion bills or all the kind of these riot bills and things of that nature. So it's one component of opportunities, but we're as a state sometimes missing out on the opportunities because of the polarizing, legislation and just the things that's going on in the nation as far as politics. We miss out on a lot of things because of that. But what I would say that when you're talking about businesses, when you're talking about accelerators and mentoring and champion big businesses coming in and really helping small businesses, finding clusters, all of those things really help educate startups. Because, the thing about it is we always look to figure out how to incentivize those businesses who are already doing things or are already kind of develop a product. But what about the people that just have an idea, right? We don't spend a lot of time in that because of, to be honest, there's not a lot of money in that, right? Because you have to help them develop it. It takes, numerous steps. But I think that we have to be more engaged in that as well. How do we kind of elevate this new generation of technology or innovative young people? When you talk about Generation Z, or you're talking about some of your younger millennials, because to be honest, a lot of them are not going to work in these factory jobs. And that's why we have a shortage, because they're not going to work there, right? And then if they don't find the job that they need, then they're going to leave Alabama, go to Atlanta, Georgia, or Nashville. And so it's a lot of dynamics that kind of play in that. But that's kind of like my 2 cents in, how we can use that support and that guidance.
Sorry.
I'd like to address the second half of that question around opportunity zones. I mean, they were designed to spur job creation, but most of that capital is flowing into just real estate and not necessarily into operating businesses. One of the recommendations that we've seen be something that folks should look at, especially in a post-COVID environment, is the role that CDFIs or community development financial institutions play. They have a long track record of making significant investments into those low-income communities or into hard-to-reach populations, and they're used to or accustomed to taking some of these higher risks. And so a redesigned opportunity incentive could encourage some equity investments in CDFIs. That would be a really great recommendation, especially in a post-COVID environment, since we know that many of these CDFI partners are rooted in the communities that they serve and are vehicles that can reach populations that otherwise would be locked out of opportunity. Jessica, sorry, I cut you off.
Perfect. You said that well, Zio. And I think I was also just thinking about some of the broader points that this group made. I think that there will always be a need for public-private partnerships. And I think CDFIs are the perfect example, Zio, of how, you can create market incentives for market-driven lending and investing, leveraging that little bit of public subsidy through the awards that the CDFIs receive from the CDFI Fund each year. And I think that the SOAR Fund is another great opportunity of that, where we have attracted private lenders and investors, because I do think there is interest from companies, as Jeremy mentioned, from institutional investors in trying to find opportunities for impact with their investment. The challenge that Lauren and Jeremy are sort of identifying in some of these communities is the need is for long-term patient capital. And the market is looking for sort of more, even if they'll accept a below market return for impact, more liquidity in those investments. And I think that is the gap where government can sort of come in and play that role and that nexus of encouraging those public-private partnerships and providing that subsidy or over-collateralization to help those programs sort of flourish. And so, the SOAR model, the recovery fund models I've talked about is one example of that. State Small Business Credit Initiative, which I've already plugged, is another very strong example of that. That legislation has a 10-to-1 leverage requirement built into the statute, so that you need to have a meaningful amount or raise a meaningful amount of private capital and combine that with a little bit of public subsidy in order to support lending investment in communities, which truly at the 10 billion authorized can be transformative for so many communities around the country. And so I think there will always be a need for public-private partnerships. I think you guys are doing the difficult work in your communities. It's tough to try to attract that long-term patient capital. And that's definitely the need that you're identifying.
One to add with the opportunity zone, actually the mayor in my city of Oklahoma, they got about 105 acres of land. They're actually building the R&D technology park, and so that was their opportunity zone was actually put in a great place for them to attract high tech businesses, and they're in the process of I'm actually trying to help them recruit some former NFL players, people who have that capital to kind of bring to the opportunity zone. But with other opportunity zones, you see them in impoverished neighborhoods. And the thing that you have to watch out for, it sometimes it can be gentrified, right? And so where they have great intentions, they may have consequences as well, right? And so it's uprooting people from their homes. And so I like it. It's like a double-edged sword. It has its use, but then it can have its consequences as well, depending on where they're located.
Thanks so much, everyone. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're supposed to wrap at 2:30. If anybody wants to continue staying and talking about these issues, we'll have this room open for another 20 minutes. But anybody who needs to jump off and for another scheduled event, please feel free to do so. And then we've got until 3 o'clock before our closing plenary at the summit. But thank you so much to everybody here. I feel like we got a lot done.
Thank you. It was great to join you all. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Nice to meet you all.
I have a question for Jeremy, if you are able to stay on.
Oh, sure.
And that is around, this concept of, we know that some business owners, especially those that have language barriers or just skills gaps with leveraging technology. I just spoke with a business owner yesterday, and she didn't, what are we on? Wednesday. So Monday, and she was unaware of the SBA's restaurant revitalization program. And we chatted at 10 a.m. and by 3 p.m. she was able to start her application. She was doing all of this on her mobile device. How do we, I have some ideas, but I would love to get a sense from you as far as how can we support the increase of adoption for these skills when the tools that are required simply are not there? Do we provide an incentive structure? Is it through leveraging existing systems like the Small Business Development Center networks that could provide those one-on-one supports? Or do you have any general thoughts about that? Because I consistently see this gap beyond language barrier, but the digital piece, and sometimes it's both. And how do we overcome that?
Yeah, so the technology barrier is real and it's there. And what Representative Gray talked about in terms of the younger generation of Alabama is not going to go to work in the Mercedes factory, or they're going to come up with a different sort of job. I think that's true with technology as well. I think the younger generation is just simply not going to put up with services from either the government or elsewhere that doesn't talk to them in a language they understand. So that will have to change, and it will. But I do think for the older generation, say anybody over the age of 30, it's absolutely real. And I wish there was an easy answer to this. I think it is simply a game of catch up. We have millions, and 2/3 of the GoDaddy workforce, the FTE workforce, are on the phone with our customers every day solving really simple technology problems. And the minute that you think that you don't know anything or don't know much about technology, if you made it onto the Zoom call, you are miles ahead of where a lot of other people are who are trying to start their small business in this country, or who are trying to start their micro business in this country. And so I see again and again and again the power of skills training at a city by city level that can just change the dynamic quickly. So I'm answering all around your question, but I think it's one part push, it's one part pull. But I also think at cities, when they think about supporting small businesses, it's not just the businesses now, it's the businesses that are going to come online. And to Representative Gray's point, the younger generation is going to start their business online. No one starts a business today just opening up a brick and mortar store. That's just a thing of the past. And so if we want to create equal opportunity, we have to allow people to not just access broadband, but take advantage of it economically.
I think one of the things that I've really valued out of even Jake's model and the Bitwise model is they've also paired some of those younger folks that are looking for work development opportunities with small businesses in that very same community, which I think is also critical, because I don't know that the expectation that a 50-year-old business owner that has always run and operated their business for the last 25 years will, immediately adopt these
Exactly.
skills. But if they're paired with someone that is also actively looking for work or looking for skills development, and if that could be compensated by a state or city or local government as part of the workforce development program, you're not just putting that piece together of the worker enhancements, but rather connecting that resource to a small business in that very same community, right?
The ROI is really tough to navigate on this, and I'll give you two examples. Is before COVID, the ROI on going online wasn't as clear as it was in the thick of COVID. So there's a reason we saw a lot of small businesses fail and a lot of online micro businesses take off. Is because when you're an online micro business, you are not limited to your small geographic footprint along your block. And so suddenly the investment needed to have a return on sort of skills training about being online, either by cities or by the entrepreneur themselves, became really clear really fast. The second thing I'll say is a reporter called us about 2 weeks ago because she had seen a McKinsey report on Black small business entrepreneurs. And the McKinsey report said that Black small business entrepreneurs, that 50+% of them were very pessimistic about both their business and their local economy, and they wanted our thoughts on it. When we take a look at the Black micro business owners that we study and that we research, 80% of them are optimistic about their business and optimistic about the future of their economy. And I think there's lots of hypotheses why, but I think predominantly it's because they start online. It sounds so simple, but when you start online, you are not limited to that 3 square block radius that may be economically depressed. If your customers suddenly leave you, it's easy to find other customers. If you need a mentor, which is a huge portion of being a successful small business person, where am I going to get mentorship? Where am I going to network? If something goes wrong, who do I contact? They're already online. They're already networked people around the world who can help them get through this problem, as opposed to oftentimes small businesses are passed from one friend to another, from father or mother to son or daughter. And so there's not this sort of great expansion of perspective and of idea of how the business could be different when it's just a brick and mortar passed down from generations or from one hand to another. So I don't like sounding myopic about this sort of online skills training thing, but I think COVID really shed a light on the power that it could do within a community and how little money it takes to actually make that happen and what a big impact it can actually have. So thanks for the question.
Thank you. I mean, I definitely think about folks like my nephews, right, or extended family members, and how they envision their place in the world when it comes to work opportunities. And even if they don't have a formal education just yet, the skills that they do have can be translated into impacting businesses. And I think if we're able to really look at this from a metric perspective, that investment could be made could continue to grow over the years. And we really need to solve for that, because I think this matching of groups, this cohort of serving very, very small disenfranchised businesses and connecting them to a skilled workforce that can also be digitally skilled, I think is meaningful, especially as we still are uncertain about a lot of things. You know, that even though a lot of places are opening and we're geared on a trajectory for a complete reopening this year, I think that customer behaviors as a result of the pandemic, some of those will remain permanent. And so in terms of purchasing online, or that bookstore that you like to visit, you might like the bundle option that they now have as a result, that they created as a result of the pandemic, where they deliver books to you once a month or what have you. So those models, we definitely are interested in continuing to think through the policy recommendations that could be made beyond the broadband infrastructure package that exists. We know that those investments are critical, but really appreciated your thoughts there. And
yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks for staying late, you guys. I'm glad to...
Kelly, this was great. Thank you very much. It was a really good discussion. I enjoyed meeting all the other panelists.
Great. I'm so glad you guys could participate. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it so much.
Bye-bye.